It was a quiet Sunday morning on March 1st, 2026. In a peaceful residential area, neighbors were slowly waking up to the normal sounds of the day. Some people were preparing for church, others were sweeping their compounds. The air was calm. Inside one of the houses on the street lived a woman known by many as Madam Ada. She was a banker, a hard-working woman who had spent years building a life from nothing. Colleagues described her as disciplined and private. She was the type of woman who kept to herself and avoided unnecessary drama. But behind that quiet life was a painful story. Years earlier, Madam Ada had walked away from her marriage after discovering repeated infidelity from her husband. The betrayal broke her trust completely. Rather than remain in a toxic relationship, she chose peace. She moved into her own house and started life again. Her two children were already grown. Both were married and living in different cities with their spouses. They visited occasionally, but most of the time, the house was quiet. Madam Ada lived alone. To neighbors, she looked strong and independent, but living alone also meant she had to rely on outside workers for repairs and maintenance around the compound. And that decision would later become the biggest mistake of her life. A few days before the incident, Madam Ada had noticed that some part of her compound needed cleaning and minor repairs. The drainage around the building had become blocked. Weeds were growing near the fence. Some parts of the backyard also needed clearing. On the morning of March 1st, 5 Hausa men arrived. They were workers, popularly known as Aboki laborers, men who moved from place to place doing manual work like clearing compounds, digging gutters, and fixing small structures. They came with tools, shovels, cutlasses, wheelbarrows. To anyone watching, it looked like a normal work day. Madam Ada opened the gate and allowed them into the compound. She explained the work that needed to be done: clearing weeds, fixing the drainage, cleaning the back area. The men listened quietly. They started working almost immediately. At first, everything looked normal, but as the morning went on, something else was happening inside the minds of those men. They began to notice something. There was no one else in the house. No husband, no children, no security guard, no domestic worker, just Madam Ada alone. The men exchanged quiet glances while pretending to continue their work. Opportunities like that were rare. Unknown to Madam Ada, some of those men had already been involved in dangerous underground activities. They had connections with people who believed in dark rituals for money. And in those dark circles, human body parts were sometimes demanded, especially the head. The value of a human head in ritual markets could be extremely high. What started as a normal job slowly turned into something far more sinister. Around late morning, Madam Ada stepped outside again to check the progress of the work. She stood near the backyard area where two of the men were clearing weeds. Another man was digging a small drainage channel with a shovel. She spoke calmly, asking if they needed water. That was the moment the decision was made. One of the men looked around the compound. The gate was closed. The street outside was quiet. Neighbors were inside their homes. Without warning, the man holding the shovel raised it high. Then he brought it down with brutal force. The metal edge of the shovel slammed directly into Madam Ada's head. The sound echoed sharply in the compound. She collapsed instantly. Her body hit the ground hard, but the men were not done. They rushed toward her to ensure she could not survive the attack. Another blow was delivered. Her body stopped moving. Silence filled the compound. The woman who had opened her gates to them only minutes earlier was now lying lifeless on the ground. But the horror had only just begun, because their real objective was not robbery, it was body parts. The men dragged her body further into the backyard where it could not easily be seen from outside. They looked around nervously but continued. One of them pulled out a sharp cutlass. What followed was an act so disturbing that it would later shock the entire community. They began dismembering parts of her body. First, they removed the head, then the wrist, then several toes. They were the specific body parts they believed were demanded by the ritual buyer who had promised them money. The rest of her body was left behind on the ground. The compound that had once been a peaceful home was now a horrifying crime scene. After collecting the body parts, the men wrapped them carefully inside the sack. Their plan was already clear: deliver the items, collect the money, and disappear. They cleaned themselves quickly using water from the compound tap, trying to remove visible stains. Then they left the house quietly. From outside, nothing looked unusual. Anyone passing by would have assumed the workers had simply finished their job, but inside the compound, the truth remained hidden. Hours passed. Madam Ada did not answer her phone. Friends from work noticed she had not responded to messages. Later that evening, one of her neighbors became suspicious when the gate remained half open and the compound unusually silent. The neighbor decided to step inside. What they saw next triggered screams that echoed across the street. Madam Ada's body was discovered in the backyard. The scene was terrifying. Emergency calls were made immediately. Police arrived within minutes. Officers sealed the compound and began a full investigation. The brutality of the crime shocked even experienced investigators. It was clear this was not a simple attack. The missing body parts suggested something far darker. Investigators began gathering clues, and one of the most important details quickly emerged. 5 workers had been seen entering the compound earlier that morning. The police immediately launched a search. Witnesses around the street provided descriptions of the men. Another breakthrough came when a nearby security camera captured footage of the suspect leaving the area carrying a sack. The footage helped investigators trace the direction they traveled. By the next day, police units had begun tracking the suspect across different locations. Then something unexpected happened. During the attempt to deliver the human head to a suspected ritual buyer, the men were intercepted. Police had already received intelligence about a possible ritual transaction involving human body parts. Officers moved quickly. 2 of the suspects were arrested first. Under interrogation, the story began to unfold. They confessed everything. They explained how they realized the woman was alone. They described the attack with a shovel. They described how they removed the body part, and they revealed the name of the person who had promised to buy the head for ritual purposes. Police immediately launched additional raids. More arrests followed. The sack containing the human head was recovered before the transaction could be completed. The news spread quickly. A respected banker, a single mother, killed in her own home by men she had hired for a simple job. Neighbors were devastated. Colleagues from the bank held a candlelight gathering in her memory. Her children rushed back to the city after receiving the terrible news. The pain was unimaginable. A mother who had survived betrayal in marriage, a woman who had worked hard to build a peaceful life. Her story ended in the most brutal way imaginable. The suspect now faced multiple serious charges. Investigators continue to dig deeper into the network of ritual buyers and middlemen connected to the case. Authorities believe the men were not acting alone, but were part of a larger underground chain that trades in human body parts. As the case moves through the justice system, one thing remains clear. A quiet Sunday morning turned into a nightmare that shattered an entire community, and the compound that once represented independence and strength for Madame Ada became the final place she would ever call home. This story remains a chilling reminder of the dangers that can sometimes hide behind ordinary situations. A gate opened for workers, a simple maintenance job, 5 men carrying tools. But behind those tools were intentions far darker than anyone could have imagined. And on March 1st, 2026, a woman who simply wanted to clean her compound lost her life in one of the most horrifying crimes the community had ever seen.